spend with you. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy.
On a rabbit hole on TV a few nights ago and watched a part of what's called the Bible, a dramatic rendition of it. But a few nights before that, I watched a documentary, and the documentary dealt with the actual crucifixion of Jesus. They had a doctor, and then they had some psychologists and scientists and so on. And it was kind of fascinating. But the thing that really stood out to me was that they did a sanitized crucifixion. They got a young man who was pretty good health, probably in his early 30s, and they hooked him up to monitors, an EKG, and estimation of breath, respiration, things of that nature. Then they put him on the cross. The way they put him on the cross was they had hooks, and they just kind of hooked him on there. Had his knees kind of bent. And then they began to notice what was happening to him. And after about 15 minutes, his heart rate was over 170 beats per minute. And it had started at roughly 70 beats per minute. His respiration had changed dramatically. His legs began to quiver. You could definitely see signs of strain as he tried to pull himself up to get another breath. That was after 15 minutes. It was decided by the doctors that they needed to take him down. And so they carefully lifted him up, took him off, sat him down, and all was well. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And there was no nails in the hands or in the feet. That young man had not been scourged. That young man did not have a crown of thorns placed on his head. Now I realize why those programs were on that channel. Because it was a lead up to today. Today is looked at in the religious world as Easter. Or if you were to look at it from the standpoint of what happened this past weekend when our president declared it to be a gender something day where you celebrate people that are confused as to their gender. I forget the true name. It didn't warrant even a scintilla of my attention. I just thought it was derogatory. But I knew people would be thinking about this. And as Dan talked about, each and every first day of the week, we are to remember the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. It is what we're about. And we need to be mindful of that each and every first day of the week. But as we think back on it, you know, I know, none of us were there. But then again, maybe we were there, present at that time. Go back with me, if you would, into the book of Luke. And we're going to go into the 23rd chapter. And when it comes to the crucifixion of Jesus, I kind of like reading Luke's account because Luke is writing from the standpoint of a physician. And he goes into a little bit more detail or a little different perspective than do the others. But in verse 48, and all the multitudes who came together for this spectacle. Now, I want you to realize that it was a spectacle. It was that which was done. Whoops. It was that which was done almost as, as you would come out for a street fair. Oh, there's going to be crucifixion. We're going to watch a man who's been scourged carry a 110-pound beam out to the Golgotha. Let's gather. It's kind of like in the days of the Civil War, early days of the Civil War, where they knew there was going to be a battle. And so the people would gather together on a knoll or a hill, would pull out the picnic blankets, picnic baskets, and sit there and watch. That didn't last too long, because then they began to see what a horrific realm war truly is. And so it makes me wonder about the people back in the first century and about the spectacle that was crucifixion. And I think Luke uses the word advisedly. When they observed what had happened, began to return, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance, seeing these things. Now, John, on his part, is one of those standing at the foot of the cross. And John records some of what he had seen. But what really stands out is the attitudes that are portrayed that day. And each one is kind of unique. And I think that's where we were there. Because we too have attitudes. And even those who chose to separate themselves are manifesting something. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 13:5, test yourselves to see whether or not you pass the test or you're in the faith. Well, that's what we try to do. We got to test ourselves. Be open. Am I there? How would I have handled it had I been in that position? Oh, we could all say that we would have been like John the Apostle. But I wonder how many of us really want to be honest with who we were there. So were you there? Look at the attitudes. Judas was there. Had it not been for Judas, they would not have known which one. Point them out to us. Point them out. In the depiction, the dramatic depiction, they showed Judas as kind of a weaselly guy. And I kind of see him that way. He was the treasurer of the funds for what was happening with the ministry of Christ. Apparently he had been pilfering. But nevertheless, he did betray Jesus. And that for 30 pieces of silver. And then after he did it, this little spark of conscience rises up. And he goes to take it back. And the Pharisees and others go, no. That's blood money. We want nothing to do with it. The hypocrisy. Judas throws it in. Judas then goes, we find in Acts, first chapter. He goes and hangs himself. Can't live with himself because of what he's done. He betrayed. He betrayed Christ. But yes, there was a sign of remorse. But look what he did to himself. By the same token, Peter was there. You can see on the overhead the various passages. And Peter, just hours before, had pulled his sword out of his sheath, going to defend Christ no matter what, and cut off the ear of the high priest's slave, a man by the name of Malchus. And you know and I know, you don't aim for an ear. You aim for the head. But in the darkness, got the ear. Jesus healed that ear. How could you have still wanted to take him and crucify him after you'd seen that happen? And I know I've used myself as an illustration. Hanging there. It was as a result of a car accident. So I go into the emergency room, and I'm covered with blood from head to toe. And it's still bleeding when I get there. The ambulance people tried to affix gauze and whatnot. It was still bleeding. But eventually they get it stitched up. Anytime there's a wound to the head, there's a profusion of blood. And then for Jesus to reach out, touch the man, to in essence cauterize without any pain the wound, staunch the bleeding, put the ear back on. How could you see that and not fall down on your knees and do what Thomas would do days later? My Lord and my God. Shows the callousness of man. But Peter was there that night. And so Peter at one moment was willing to fight and die. Jesus is taken into custody. Peter follows from a distance. But Jesus had told him, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. Peter did. Denied Christ 3 different times. Well, are we like that? Do we deny Christ? Do we apologize for being a follower of Jesus? I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. I can't do that. I'm sorry, I'm a Christian. I don't believe that. See, and I know we've talked about it before, but it's so diabolical that it seeps into us. And we don't really realize the magnitude of what we're saying. I'm sorry. Have you ever disowned your spouse? There was an old Raymond show. Everybody loves Raymond. And on it, he was at the back doing something. Oh, filling his pockets with meat. And caused attention. And when somebody came to his wife, she disowned him. I don't know him. That's not my husband. Now, she could have been embarrassed. She could have been mortified. But to disown him? And I realize that's situation comedy. I understand that. But project it out. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done that? Been so embarrassed of what your son or daughter, spouse has done, you disown them. Don't know them. Have you done that with Christ? Been put in a position where others challenge you because you're a Christian. I'm sorry. Rather than saying, yeah, I'm glad. I am a Christian. I'm proud. This is who I am. Just as I am. This is who I am. And I'm proud of it. So yeah, Judas was there. Peter was there. Represented by two attitudes that stand the test of time. Were you there? Pilate was there. And Pilate is, how do I describe Pilate? Politician, okay? When you look at him, though, I use phraseologies like idiot, but that doesn't seem to describe him. Pilate had people killed at the drop of a hat. Pilate was a reprehensible human being. But when Jesus is presented before him in John the 18th chapter, verses 33 and following, Pilate tries to do the political thing. I want nothing to do with this man. I'll send him back to somebody else. And Jesus realized this. And so Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this realm. If my kingdom were of this realm, then my disciples, my followers, would be fighting that I not be delivered up. But as I said, my kingdom is of this realm. So Pilate goes, you know what? I'll have him scourged. Maybe that'll placate the Jews. It didn't. Pilate was not a man of courage. He was a man that tried to placate rather than to stand for truth. What is truth? He asked the question. We talked about that 4 weeks ago. What is truth? Conformity to fact. That's truth. Jesus conformed to the fact that he is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah. Chief priest that night asked him directly, are you the Messiah? Are you the Christ? Jesus said, I am. I am. What further need do we have of testimony? They cried out. So Pilate thought he was a man of courage, but he really wasn't. He capitulated. The soldier was there, and he had a hand in putting Jesus to death. And he guarded over what was transpiring. And one of the things that I thought was interesting in the documentary that I saw was the depiction of how high the cross wasn't. That in most instances it shows them up maybe 8 to 10 feet. No, the depiction was that his feet were at such a level that the jackals could bite him and get him. The soldier was there and he sees all this, sees the horror upon horror. He sees where the sun tried to shine through the clouds, but there was the eclipse. Were you there? And he was there, and he saw it. Where of all the others, the rocks being split. And then saw Jesus take his last breath. And that soldier was there. And he said, this truly was the Son of God. Are we like that modern day soldier? We look back at the testimony, the witness that we have, and we can say with absolute confidence, Jesus is the Son of God. See, that's why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written, so that we may believe. Turn over to the first chapter of 1 Corinthians. Look at verse 21. 1 Corinthians 1:21. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For indeed, Jews ask for signs, Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and wisdom of God. So were you there? Were you there? We'll use that slide. We had a little bit of technical problems this morning. And so thank you for bearing with us. The other day, just sidebar, this isn't part of the sermon. I'm just explaining something. We had to have a new service put in, and we now are with Spectrum rather than AT&T. And so we had some issues. But whether we have technical problems or not, the message remains the same. We simply want Jesus Christ and Him crucified. And we want our attitude to be such that embraces Him, not apologetic, not of betrayal, not of denial, but one of full acceptance. To realize that, yeah, He did die. His heart was pierced in the side with the spear. You had the issuance of water and blood, indicative of heart failure, if you would. He was fully dead. The soldier, this is the Son of God. Now stop and think of that. That soldier making that announcement after that soldier had been instrumental in the death of Jesus, like we were talking about in class this morning. With God, it's never too late. There is always time to turn to Him. Mary and John both had a level of commitment that was unparalleled. They were there right to the end. They heard the soldier make that enunciation. I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross. Abounding in the service. So yeah, there is a cost that has to be paid. Cost of discipleship, if you will. And it is one that we're willing to embrace. Look back at Colossians, first chapter, verse 23. And this will be the last passage. Then the lesson will be yours. If indeed you continue in the faith, firmly established and steadfast, not moved away from the hope of the gospel that you have heard, which was proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, was made a minister. That's what we do. We continue to proclaim it each and every day. There's no apology. There's only celebration. Thanks be to God that he sent his son to be the propitiation for my sins, and not only for my sins, but those of the whole world. Make it personal, make it real, and enjoy the fact if you have put on Christ, you've been engrafted into the household of God. But if you've not put on Christ in the waters of baptism, everything's ready. The only thing that's waiting is for your decision. If you've already done that, but you need prayers for strength or encouragement, we stand at the ready to assist any, help any with spiritual needs while we stand and sing the song selected.